And we are live. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Joseph Cohen from the Israel Advocacy Network, for being here. As you can all see, we got a nice little new camera hookup. That is actually partially thanks to our supporters, our patrons. So, shout out to all the patrons. If you want to support the show, you can find how to do so in the description. Today, Joseph and I are going to have a vibrant discussion on the topic of is Israel using disproportionate force or excessive force? I believe they are. Joseph, I imagine, believes they are not. So it's going to be a good, vibrant yet respectful conversation. Joseph, before we get started, first of all, thanks for joining us. I do want to know just a little bit more about your advocacy work. You know, you started the Israel Advocacy movement, and it's as such, it's a movement for Israel advocacy. But I'd like to know a little bit more about its goals and how you go about this advocacy.
So it's effectively one goal, and that's Jewish survival. However, Jewish survival is intrinsically linked to us having a homeland and being able to defend ourselves. I live in a nation which is incredibly hostile to Israel, the United Kingdom. And as a community, we've been quite ineffective at reaching those that harbor negative views around the Jewish state. And so in 2015, I launched the Israel Advocacy Movement. We've grown into the largest online pro-Israel platform in the UK. And our videos get watched by tens of millions of people, and they're predominantly not Jewish. So our largest audience is actually Muslim, then Christian. Christians actually subscribe. Muslims on lesser numbers subscribe to our content. And one of the key things that we're trying to do is to inspire other Jews to leave their armchairs. I am a working class Jew, very poorly educated, not that articulate, struggle to find my words. But I've been able to build the platform I have, not because of any innate skills or knowledge, but just because I did something. And so the whole purpose of the Israel Advocacy Movement is to create content that inspires Jews to take action, wakes Jews up to the threat that exists within the UK, strengthens the connection between the United Kingdom and Israel, and ultimately tries to make the world a little bit safer for my family and my children than it is for us today. So that's in a nutshell. Cool. And you can find us on all social medias: Israel Advocacy Movement, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter. So yeah, give us a follow.
Awesome. And I have put some links in the description to the YouTube and the Twitter if you want to follow Israel Advocacy Movement. So thanks for sharing that. I guess I'm wondering, because the goal is Jewish survival, would you say in a sense that the ends justify the means? So, for example, let's say Israel does something that is clearly bad. Would you not report on it because your goal is not to report accurately on what's happening? It's to defend Israel by all means necessary. Like, what do you do in such a situation?
So I agreed with part of what you said, but not the entirety. So I don't agree that the ends justify the means at all. There are limitations to what I would support. There are limitations to what I think Israel should do to preserve Jewish lives. Obviously, we're not monsters. They'd be pretty, both from a human perspective, from a religious perspective, from every perspective, that would be a very problematic position for any Jewish person to take. The bit which I kind of agreed with is I don't see it as my function to report on to add to the hate. So if I'm in a conversation like we are now, and you point out something that Israel's done that I will disagree with, I'm happy to say that. But we don't make a point of producing anti-Israel content, because there are millions and millions and millions of people that are hating Israel, and only a tiny fraction of people supporting Israel. And so our job is to strengthen and to create support for Israel, not to add fuel on the fire that's the raging inferno around the state of Israel.
Which is fair enough, and I am glad that you said that you are happy to acknowledge if Israel does something wrong on this live stream, though you won't be making content about it. I think that will allow us to potentially achieve some common ground here. And by the way, this is something that I call it a moral dilemma. I don't want to contribute to hate of any kind, not towards either side, but I also feel the need to report as honestly and truthfully as possible, and sometimes that's impossible to do without contributing to hate or fear. So I try to, I'm walking a fine line for how can I talk about like either Israel or Hamas doing something that's horrible in a way that won't contribute to hate of the entire nation. It's not always possible. So I think this is probably this is a distinction with, call it my advocacy and your advocacy. I don't consider myself to be a pro Israel advocate. I'm more so of a pro peace advocate. For me, that comes with heavily criticizing both sides and trying to support the narratives of both sides. So just a little distinction between how we're approaching things. But yeah, I think we're let's get into this. So we agreed that I'll make the case that Israel is using excessive force, and then you will make the counter case. So I think the case, we can really look at it from both ways, from two ways. One, commands coming from the top, and also from individual soldiers acting on their own accord. I'll start from commands coming from the top. Israel has a policy in Gaza, or in general, when we get hit, we hit back harder. This is claimed to be used as a deterrent, and also, let's say, to hinder the capabilities of Hamas. But another reason why I think this is the policy of Israel, which is for obvious reasons not stated, it's that the Israeli population expects it expects a response, and this isn't unique for Israelis. Any population which is attacked would expect their government to hit back harder. There seems to be some innate wiring humans have. If you get hit back harder. This is known as a tit for tat strategy. Um, Again, this is also can explain why Palestinians were overwhelmingly supportive of October 7th. They think Israelis should be hit for all Israel has done to them. Now, when we look at the past conflicts in Gaza, it doesn't seem clear that they really have acted as a deterrent or to hinder Hamas's capabilities. I think October 7th proves this to be, up until now, a flawed policy. But what we don't know for sure a result of Israel's policy in Gaza is that it certainly kills civilian lives. It traumatizes millions of Palestinians. It makes Hamas more popular. It makes Israel less popular, and it gets the international community to pour billions of dollars into Gaza, a lot of which is then spent to build more tunnels and manufacture weapons that can then fight Israel. So our policy has been, let's create deterrent, let's hinder Hamas's capabilities, and then October 7th happened, the deadliest day in Jewish history since the Holocaust. When that happened, we said, okay, well, it hasn't worked till now, so now we're going to take it to whole new levels. Now we're going to defeat Hamas by essentially destroying Gaza from the air. But I think, again, there's a similar logic that the population wants, in a sense, vengeance. They are sick and tired of terror. They're furious. They're traumatized. And the leadership, military and intelligence and political, have been humiliated by October 7th. So I think a lot of the force we're seeing right now is not, again, I don't believe there's a strong case to be made that it's going to create a deterrent or hinder Hamas long term. Again, it's hard to know how this will play out, but I think there's a strong case to be made that this is Benjamin Netanyahu saving face for a massive military blunder, the largest blunder in his long career of blunders. When we look at the actual toll of these airstrikes, I think a conservative estimate is 85 to 90% civilian deaths. Now, how did I reach this number? Because people like to say we just can't know. There's no way to know how many civilians have been killed. Well, I'm very skeptical when official sources report on things, both Israel and Hamas. They both have a long history of disinformation, and I have a long list to back up this claim. But interestingly, the Gaza Ministry of Health, and I was surprised to discover this because I didn't trust them until researching, they actually have been pretty accurate in the reporting. And the way I reached this conclusion, I looked at past conflicts, and their reporting on death toll has actually been within a few percent of what Israel reports and within a few percent of what the UN reports. Now, they released every single name and ID number of those killed in airstrikes since October 7th. Now, this registry of the Gazan population is controlled by Israel. So the claim can't be made that they're making up names and ID numbers. This can very easily be verified. When you go through these names and ID numbers, you see that 70% of those killed have been women and children. The 30% have been men over the age of 18. It's very fair to assume that the overwhelming majority of them are not militants, because the majority of the Gazan population are not militants. Hamas is primarily hiding underground, while civilians don't have that privilege. So we've seen, I think the number is now closing in on 30,000 deaths. Close to 90% have been civilians. Hamas is hiding in tunnels. We're losing soldiers every day. The infrastructure in Gaza has been decimated. The UN and the UN and the World Health Organization put out a report saying there have been 606 attacks on healthcare facilities, including hospitals and ambulances. Yeah, it's true. It's possible Hamas was having operations out of these facilities, but this is a conscious decision. Israel can understand that this war will cause a lot of civilian harm, and we need these medical facilities intact. So let's spare them, so the population will still have facilities in which they could care for their wounded. But Israel made a decision to attack healthcare facilities. So it's clear that Israel does not need to be engaging in this strategy, and it's not hard to understand why there is international outcry. Now, this is on the. Actually, maybe I'll end it here. I do want to get on individual soldiers because I actually think there's a strong case to be made that soldiers are executing unarmed Palestinians. But I want to let you respond to this, and then we'll get to the individual soldier side of things.
Could you just clarify one thing before I start?
Yeah, sure.
Well, but did you say that? What did you say around ID? Those named with both names and ID numbers. What were the percentages and the numbers you gave for that?
The Gaza Ministry of Health releases all the names and ID numbers. They didn't give any percentages. It's up for public scrutiny. When you look through them, when you look at the names and numbers, and this is a registry that's managed by Israel, you see that 70% of the names and ID numbers released have been women and children.
And so when was that last updated, that list?
I believe
this one that was released in December, or is this a more recent list?
I think they have released it twice. There was one in the previous one that was released had longer time to go under scrutiny, but I don't know if it was the first release or the second release. But the Gaza Ministry of Health is consistently showing receipts, right? They're not hiding these numbers.
No, my understanding was I thought they'd only released it once, but they've released around 7,000 names was what I remembered, and that's a long way from the death toll that they're reporting today. But anyway, it's a moot point because it is actually inconsequential.
Yeah, but okay, wait. Even I could look this up, but let's even just say that's the case. You could still, if in December we're at 7,000 deaths, it's not like the rate of airstrikes and firepower used in Gaza has diminished. You could still conclude we're closing in on 30,000, right? So, and again, we could also look at past conflicts and see that the Gaza Ministry of Health is pretty consistent with, or pretty accurate with the numbers they release. But the 7,000 figure should still give us a pretty good estimate of the civilian death toll.
So Israel is estimating that it's taken. Actually, I'm going to step back and respond to the. Yeah. So your initial framing of what's going on was littered with I think, I believe. And the reason that's problematic is because there is no room for suspicion. It's either something is factual or it isn't. Either Israel is disproportionately targeting or disproportionately killing civilians in an indiscriminate and reckless way, or it isn't.
Well, but these are subjective notions, right? Disproportionate, reckless are subjective. So my opinion actually matters. It's not this isn't something that's purely fact based. Not to mention things are hard to prove within the fog of war.
So that's exactly what I'm trying. That's where I want to take this. Things are very hard to prove within the fog of war. What we can do is we can look at Israel's actions rather than trying to guess the intentions of it. Because you said that you think that Israeli soldiers are murdering Palestinians, deliberately murdering civilians, individual soldiers, not the army as a collective.
Yeah. There's a strong case to be made. I don't. Let me make it clear. I don't think Israel is targeting. Israeli airstrikes are deliberately targeting civilians. I think they're targeting infrastructure that might be somehow connected to Hamas. I think they know that civilians are going to be killed, and there's a by and large a disregard for life that is lost. There's a level of disproportionality that,
I don't think there is a disregard at all. So if you're in an armed combat or conflict, the worst thing you can do is give away your competitive advantages. So the element of surprise, where you're going to hit, how you're going to hit an area. And so if you cast your mind back to the beginning of the conflict, the beginning of October, Israel took weeks warning the residents of Gaza City to move south. We've all seen the videos of the IDF dropping flyer after flyer, thousands and thousands and thousands of flyers warning the civilians to leave, that there was going to be a ground incursion, there was going to be an aerial bombardment at a scale that Gaza City had not seen before. Now, this wasn't because Israel was bloodthirsty and, as you framed it, out for vengeance. This was because Israel had suffered the worst attack on a single day in terms of civilian casualties that it has ever experienced since 40 years, in fact, the War of Independence. It was the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. So Israel is directly responding to this threat. It then spent a huge amount of time and putting its own people, the citizens of Israel, and its own soldiers at risk by telling Hamas effectively, we're coming to Gaza. Now, Israel had no choice but to go to Gaza City because Hamas had fortified the city. They had a labyrinth of tunnels under Gaza, over 500 kilometers, placing their civilians above them and using those civilians as human shields. As the IDF warned civilians to leave, Hamas warned them if they would leave, there would be consequences. There are countless videos online of Palestinian residents saying they can't leave because Hamas, not Israel, Hamas are shooting them when they try to leave via the corridors that Israel had created, the evacuation corridor. And none of this is the action of a government that, as you say, does not care about civilian life. If it did not care about civilian life, it would do what every other military does when they engage in combat. And it would not want civilians to leave. It would not create go to the extreme lengths that Israel went to preserve civilian life. The Israelis abided by the Geneva Convention. They established safe zones, which Hamas in turn turned into unsafe zones by firing upon Israeli positions. Each and every time, it was Hamas that was bringing and drawing the fire on the area where the civilians were settling, whether it was Gaza City, whether it was Khan Yunis. These were places which Hamas are open about. Hamas are explicit with what they're doing. I'll go to quotes if we need to. Khaled Mashal, Isa Sinwar, various Palestinian or Hamas leaders explicitly saying that they've built the tunnels to protect the fighters, that the Palestinians, the civilians should sacrifice their lives, etc. And all of your argument removed all of that context and just placed Israelis as bloodthirsty, out for vengeance, indiscriminately killing Palestinians in some like sadistic and genocidal type approach. It's not what we see. I would challenge you to point out any military that's done anything remotely equivalent or comparable to what Israel did in trying to preserve civilian life when engaging in such a densely populated civilian area.
Sure. So, first of all, I'm not going to disagree with you on the point that Hamas is complicit in the deaths of Gazan civilians. They embed their infrastructure within um, civilian infrastructure, which makes it impossible for Israel to strike Hamas without killing civilians, right? So I don't think we have a disagreement there. But Israel, knowing this, then has a choice for how to act, okay? And the choice in how they act, I think, is certainly um, open for global condemnation, as we're seeing. And it's not anti-Semitism, as many would suggest. So taking measures like leaflets, that's true. They didn't have to do that, but it's almost like saying, let's just zoom out and give like a different example, because sometimes it's easier to understand it if we use like a more trivial example that's not as we're not as emotionally tied to. But let's say you have an example of police brutality, and then they'll be like, yeah, but in the police force, what we do is we have this protocol. We try to minimize harm, but then you have a video clearly of police brutalizing people. Just because there are measures taken does not absolve Israel of responsibility, and it doesn't mean that they are not in other regards acting excessively. So they had everybody move south, right? And then they started bombing the south, right? They didn't have them move north. They just started bombing the south shortly after. Cutting off food and water in Gaza is also creating a humanitarian crisis. I get it. They want to put pressure on Hamas to come to the negotiating table. But again, this is a conscious decision Israel's taking, which is causing immense harm to civilians. Also, you could bomb Gaza. That doesn't mean you need to bomb hospitals. It doesn't mean you need to level full neighborhoods. So just because they've taken some actions to reduce harm doesn't mean it absolves them from their responsibility. And again, when we look at the numbers, it seems like around 90% have been civilian deaths. So Israel's goal is to defeat Hamas. But if they know that airstrikes are overwhelmingly killing civilians, is the military gain they are achieving from these airstrikes worth the death toll to civilians? I don't think it's a radical position to say absolutely not. And again, maybe a lot of this comes down to how much we decide to value Palestinian life. I think most people who view this through a lens of humanism would say, I don't accept that level of sacrifice of civilian life. If you're Israeli and you're furious, or if you're going to value Jewish life significantly more than Palestinian life, I think you could reach a conclusion. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Civilians will die. We have a goal. But this international outcry, and even outcry called from an Israeli Jew like myself, is perfectly legitimate. The numbers show they are, and it's unclear if we're even going to achieve the goal of defeating Hamas. I think we have a very long way to go. Not to mention we have soldiers dying every single day, and who knows how many more months to years before we achieve a goal. And it's not even clear what our strategy is long term in Gaza. So it seems like we're causing a whole lot of death, a whole lot of destruction without a clear end goal. And this global condemnation is perfectly justified in my opinion. And let me just give one more example. Remember when Israel blew up the parliament building that they controlled? They took over the parliament building and then demolished it. What was the purpose of that? That wasn't used for terrorist activities. Israel was in control of it, right? So they're clearly destroying infrastructure that they don't have to. The parliament is going to be needed after the war is over. But again, so there's this sense: let's destroy, let's show Israelis that we are protecting them, that we are getting Gaza back for what they did. And the polling supports this, right? 50 something percent support the level of attacks in Gaza, and another 20% think we're not hitting Gaza strong enough. The Israeli population, they want to see this force. They want to feel like there's reprisal for these attacks, and this is a lot of where this level of force is coming from.
So your portrayal of Israelis is pretty appalling.
Well,
The
Israelis
want safety. They don't want vengeance and death as you're framing it. They want safety. There are 160,000 displaced Israelis at the moment, internally displaced, who are living in hotels and unable to return to their houses.
My sister was one of them.
Yeah. And for you to sit there and saying that they want the blood, they want vengeance, they want the destruction of buildings, is a slur on your people.
I would say that all people, it's not just Israelis, all people, when attacked, have this sense of justice. Not sorry, when I say all people, I don't mean every individual, but all populations, right? So after 9/11, um, Americans overwhelmingly wanted to see Al Qaeda be destroyed. And let me give you just a clear way to look at this. Let's say Israel could have said, you know what, after October 7th, we have this way to make sure this never happens again, but we're not going to kill, no Hamas member is going to die, but you will be safe. That would have been widely unpopular because it's not all about security. This is an innate human need to hit back when you're hit. This is actually wired into our DNA. So I'm not going to say this is an Israeli thing. Humans in general, when they're attacked, they want to see those who attack them hit back. So yeah, Israelis are human.
Somehow you on your lofty clouds are immune from that, and you don't want blood, you want peace, whereas the rest of the Israelis are somehow beneath you. They have this instinctive reaction just to go and kill Palestinians.
Some percentage of the population are able to take a step back from their emotional response and look for more peaceful resolutions. Again, this will exist in all populations around the world. You do have people who say, you know what, that attack was horrible, even traumatizing, but an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, right? This is a philosophy that does exist. It's just not extremely popular. And the more people are engaged in conflict like Israelis and Palestinians have been for 100 years now, the more radical they become. So the Israeli and Palestinian people are more radical than they've ever been. Not surprising to understand why. Conflict radicalizes people. So I don't know if I'm on a lofty cloud, but I feel immensely grateful that I don't have an emotional response that causes me to be okay with civilians dying or feel that
But Israelis are not okay with that. You are
they're
dragging the good name of the Israeli people through the. I find what you're doing. Like, if we were just arguing, and the argument was the IDF is doing X, Y, and Z, and I believe that is immoral. That's a civil conversation where we could. But you're not. You're saying the Israelis want blood. That's your argument. Your argument is about the actions of the IDF. Your commentary is entirely around libeling the Jewish people, not the Jewish people, the Israeli state, and the Israeli people. And I find that side of it concerning. It's like you've learned nothing from October 7th. The majority of those living in the kibbutzim were exactly as you described. They saw, they hoped and looked for the best in those that crossed over the border and slit their throats. 85% of Palestinians in the West Bank agreed with those attacks. What you're saying removes all of that context and says the only thing the Israelis care about is we were hit hard, we need to hit back harder, and we need to see lots of dead Palestinians. And I think that's an appalling, for someone who's lived in the land, who will have family and friends, to describe them in such inaccurate and ugly language. You've gone, by the way.
Yeah, I'm still here. I don't know what happened. Okay, well, we are gonna. You can keep going. I'll fix this.
Let's just call it in Hebrew hashgacha pratit, but divine providence.
There we go. We're back to the shitty camera, but it was a good run. We'll get that going for next time. Okay, I'm with you.
And so, well, we can come back to Israel actually.
Well, I do want to speak on this point because I'm not putting Israelis in a special category. I think Palestinians also want blood. That's why 85% support the attacks. I think people in conflict generally start to be brutal in how they feel about the other. I'm not going to say that Israelis, like, what is the fundamental need here? Yeah, Israelis want to be safe, but and what do Palestinians want? They want justice, right? So there could be an underlying force behind why they support these actions, but many Israelis are cheering for the destruction of Gaza. If you speak to Israelis, you will see this. There's been songs put out calling for the destruction of Gaza. There's been cheering for the destruction. We're hearing from the people to politicians saying there are no civilians in Gaza. They're all terrorists. People in the comments section here are making these claims. So again, I'm not putting Israelis in some special category that they're inherently vengeful. No, I don't think that's the case. I think Israelis are human. They're acting as humans act, given 100 years of conflict, or given the brutality of October 7th. So let me make it clear. Israelis are not special in this regard, but that doesn't mean that absolves Israeli government of their responsibility, and it doesn't mean that the global outcry is unjustified.
So just coming back to October 7th then, as a Jewish citizen of the state of Israel, you went on October the 6th, you held the positions you hold today. Like what you're saying now on screen, I don't know if that...
Yeah, my position, my positions, I'm not sure any of my positions change, and I wasn't as horrible as October 7th was. None of that surprised me. I knew exactly what Hamas was capable of. I knew exactly what Palestinian population were capable of supporting.
Didn't surprise you that 85% of the moderate West Bank supported that? That surprised me. And that surprises me that you say that, because I know you have as much contact as I do with Palestinians, and the overwhelming majority of Palestinians I speak to would not get behind, at least to my face, would not get behind such acts of savagery. So to hear such high volumes of people supporting the beheading, the rapes, the kidnapping of babies, to see so many of our neighbors who we've been advocating for peace with, I've been advocating for a two-state solution for many years, to see so many people celebrate jubilantly such violent acts of barbarism was surprising for me. And it blows my mind that you weren't surprised by that, given the amount of work you put in to advancing a state for the Palestinians.
The reason I wasn't surprised is as such. First of all, there's always going to be some kind of a bias with the people we're talking to, because those who are willing to speak to us are the most moderate. So we're generally going to speak to those who are less likely to support violence. But the overwhelming majority of Palestinians aren't yet willing to engage with Israelis. That's one. Two, there's been other polling to show what percent of Palestinian population support violent resistance. So I don't think anything here is entirely surprising if we look at past polling and just a greater understanding of just the fact that the Palestinians talking to us don't want violence. That doesn't represent the majority of the population.
So let's just park there. So you went into this conflict knowing that the majority of Palestinians, the overwhelming majority of Palestinians, would be fine with the slaughter of babies, the ripping open of pregnant women, and the shedding of the fetus on the floor,
Joseph,
kidnapping of babies, the kidnapping
Joseph, I need to stop you right there, because October 7th was brutal, but there was only one baby was killed on October 7th by Hamas. This is part of a disinformation campaign.
Adar, I've been there. I've met the survivors. What are you talking about?
Hold on. Wait, Israel released the name of every single person killed on October 7th. There was one baby killed. Her name is Nila. She was shot by a Hamas soldier. He confessed to it. We know this. This whole idea that babies were slaughtered, Israel isn't even saying that. Every single name is released. So that just isn't true. I will not deny that there was a brutal massacre of civilians.
8 babies. There was a room with 8 babies burnt alive. I don't know if burnt alive. There was a baby burnt in the oven. There was a mother.
That's not true. Joseph, I'm
okay. So Adar, I'm going to send you footage after this stream.
Sure.
I'm going to show you, and I'll actually send you the videos. You can see with your own eyes. I've seen the press screening. I don't know if you've seen the press screening. I've seen them murdering children. I've seen this is staggering for me. Like, you're in this space, you have a responsibility with a platform to at least go on their own Telegram channels and look what they're posting. Like, you can literally see them sharing these videos.
I have watched many hours. Every public video that has been made available, I have watched. The 42 minutes of the screening, I have seen minute by minute reports of people who have watched it. There are certain claims that are being made that are very easy to verify. A baby in an oven, a baby getting cut out of the mother's stomach.
So
All it takes is,
I'm
oh
gonna
wait,
send you all of these
just send it
videos.
to me. All it takes is a photo. You send that photo to the UN, Human Rights Watch, and many other NGOs, and you could prove it to be the case. But if all these babies were killed, what are their names? Every single person killed on October 7th, their name has been made public. So we know one baby was killed. We know this to be true. Again, this by no means says that a brutal massacre didn't occur on October 7th, but I think it's very important to report honestly based on what we know to be true. And even more so, atrocity denialism is running rampant. And when we engage in what we can call atrocity propaganda and make uncorroborated claims, that is used as fodder and only fuels atrocity denialism. So reporting accurately on the atrocity that occurred on October 7th is essential if we want to fight atrocity denialism.
So I was quickly trying to pull them up. What I'll do, I will, following the stream, I'm actually going to send you video footage of everything I'm describing.
Okay, yeah. I'd be happy to, but again,
and I would encourage you, Adar, I would encourage you, as someone who operates in this space, to subscribe to Palestinian Telegram. See what Islamic.
I'm in them. I'm in the Palestinian Telegrams. I've watched.
Go back to October 7th and have a look at the videos they live stream. They uploaded to their own platforms.
Sure. If I'm almost certain I've seen all the public videos. If you send me one, I'd be happy to look at it. But again,
in terms of stuff which is definitely public, you've certainly seen the photograph of the baby with its slit throat, yeah, where the face is blurred and the head's kind of lopsided. You can't. The Netanyahu shared.
There's one photo of a baby that the face is blurred, and that is Nila. Yeah. That is the baby that was killed.
Did you see the burnt remains where they're kind of twisted together? Did you see the decapitated skull?
So it turns out that wasn't a baby, and the way we know that wasn't a baby is because, again, Israel released the name of every single person killed, the name and the age.
So what was it, Adar? What was that burned corpse?
Well, there was a lot of burning going on, so it could have been a burnt part of a body. It's unclear. But again, Israel
and
released
the little skull that's been decapitated and burned. What was that?
No little girl was decapitated and burned. Again, this is very easy to prove.
Okay. I didn't take him.
I don't want the entire discussion to be on the dis and misinformation spread by Israel and pro-Israeli people. I don't, but a lot of the claims are very easy to prove. There's this technology called a camera. You take a photo, you send it to the UN, many human rights organizations. That was not done. Israel released the name of every single person killed and their age. You could look at the list. One baby was killed. Her name is Nila. We know how she was killed. Again, a brutal massacre occurred, but a lot of the claims being made are simply not true. And all this does is give fodder to atrocity denialers.
So, following this, I'm going to show you the videos. I'm going to show you the content that they shared, that they posted. And
okay.
If
we can't stream it live, but I am happy. Look, I often, after I do these discussions, I go on and I do a review, sharing reflections. I'm giving my word now publicly. I'm going to watch everything you send me, and I will go back live, and you're welcome to join, and we could talk about it. But again, some claims are easy to prove. They have not yet been proven. We're going based on the names Israel released, and we see that there's been one baby killed. But you did start making a point that I saw what happened on October 7th, and I interrupted you because you made claims that just didn't happen.
This is the thing and it ties into what I'm saying.
Okay. So, I do want to hear your point. Yeah.
So October the 6th, I was a different person to who I was on October the 8th, because we had a religious festival in the UK, and we have 2 days of Yom Tov. Nothing that I've always been an optimist. I've advocated for any solution that brought about lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians. I've met thousands and thousands of Palestinians, both there in Israel, here. So Arabs in Israel, Palestinians in the West Bank. The only Gazans I meet are in Europe because or online. And I was shocked to see not just the atrocities, but the level of support that was expressed from not just one or two. Like it was even on the day. Picture the scene. They've got the corpse of a 21-year-old Israeli girl, Jewish girl, stripped naked, pretty much, on the back of a truck, and hundreds of Palestinians flood through the streets, cheering and spitting and mutilating the corpse. There is no comparable sentiment amongst the Israelis. There would be revulsion if a corpse was dragged through the streets of Tel Aviv. You wouldn't have hundreds of Israeli Jews, Arabs, anyone coming out and beating the corpse, spitting on the corpse, mutilating the corpse. If it was found that Israelis had gone into Gaza and raped and murdered children, and now you're not going to deny children, so we'll take what we definitely agree with. Children were murdered. A baby was murdered. I'll show you more, but just to avoid just getting stuck in that rut. Children were murdered. Holocaust survivors were murdered. You would not see jubilant crowds on the streets of Tel Aviv celebrating that. This is the thing for me, is you've taken nothing from that. You went in on October the 6th, you were an optimist that was defending basically, in my opinion, Hamas now. And you've come out October the 8th and you're doing the same work. You're providing cover for them. It's all good and well wanting a two-state solution. A two-state solution, fine, but it's not with these savages, Hamas, the current leadership, the Palestinian Authority, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. None of these factions would make for a responsible government that you should be putting your weight behind and advocating effectively for their cause. And so, for me, I've listened to so many Israelis on the left, particularly from the Gaza envelope, who on October the 6th had the exact same position as you. After having Hamas come through and rampage through their kibbutzim, inflicting atrocity after atrocity on innocent civilians, many of them, most of them, have changed their position. They've learned something from this. You seem to have learned nothing from this. Like from what you're saying, yeah. I went with this and I was right. And after witnessing this, I still believe that I was right. And that actually my biggest takeaway is that all that Israel's doing now is wanting to kill as many Palestinians as possible, which is just an appalling. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of strawmanning you a bit there,
but that is a straw man, because it's not they want to kill as many Palestinians as possible. It's that they're attacking with a force, and there's by and large a disregard for Palestinian life if they see they could get even the smallest military gain. So I think there could be a calculation.
Why did they fly it?
Again, I said by and large, so I think I'm not going to deny there's flyers, and they said they're stopping at a certain point. They stopped to do the warning shots that they used to do at the very early days. Benjamin Netanyahu said we're no longer going to do that. But again, I'm not denying that there's no precaution taken, but I think there's a level of proportionality that is causing immense civilian harm. So let me just give you an example, right? There could be intelligence can say, you know what? We know that there's 2 Hamas militants in this home. There's also 20 civilians. Okay, let's go for it. Let's knock it down because we want to kill those 2 militants. That is a choice that a military can take. And the case I'm making is that Israel is consistently making these choices, knowing that overwhelmingly civilians are going to die. And the proof is in the numbers of civilians being killed. But I want to talk about me not changing my perspective much. What exactly was I wrong about? I remain optimistic or hopeful because I believe that is the best path forward. So I knew exactly what Hamas is capable of. I knew exactly what the Palestinian population was capable of supporting. That October 7th didn't prove that to me. I knew that prior. So what is there for me to change my mind on? Now, why do I still believe that peace is possible? And by the way, I've never been a huge promoter of a two-state solution. Um, I could get behind it if I think it would work, but I think a federation or confederation might be more realistic. And I've never been one to defend or support Hamas. In fact, my last live stream was a review of the Hamas charter, where I spent an hour trashing the charter and talking about how disingenuous it was, and making it clear that they view their primary means of resistance being violent. And I'm very open and clear when I say that Palestinian resistance has been primarily violent and primarily targeted towards civilians. And part of the reason why their conditions are as such is because of their dedication towards violent resistance. So no, I'm not by any means a Hamas supporter. My position didn't change because I didn't learn anything new. I didn't see anything new. Yeah, I was very, very troubled by October 7th. In fact, I know people taken hostage. One still has not yet been returned. I know someone whose mother was murdered. So it affected me personally. My sister had to leave her home. She lives in the north. So again, it's not like this was easy for me to see, but I was well aware of what was possible, and nothing here has changed. And I'll go on to say the reason why I remain hopeful is because the only constant is change. People change every single day. Every generation is a new opportunity. People are, by and large, responding to their environmental condition, whether that is needing to wait at a checkpoint, being abused by an Israeli soldier, or what they're taught in schools by, the PA or Hamas. All this is environment. All this can change. This will lead to different outcomes. So I remain dedicated to creating change that will change the environment, making it one that's more hospitable to populations that are oriented towards peace. No matter how bad the situation gets, this will remain true, that certain change can bring us closer to peace, and I'm dedicated to making that change happen.
So who are you making peace with? This is the thing I just don't understand. So October the 7th happened.
Mm-hmm.
1,200 Israelis, were slaughtered. It was carried out by all factions: the Democratic, the FLP, the PFLP, Islamic Jihad, Hamas, Palestinian Authority,
as well as civilians. Some of the worst brutalities were Gazan civilians. Important to, just so we understand.
Yeah.
So everyday civilians took advantage and did some of the most brutal things. I'm supporting your argument here, okay?
And so you witness all of that. You then see overwhelming support for what they did by the Palestinian population. And your response is, I am hopeful for peace. So my question is, peace with who? Like, let's say Biden gets his way and there's a ceasefire tomorrow, and where they push hard for the two-state solution, which is what all Western leaders are pushing for. Or you get your way, you get a confederation. Who's involved in this? Is it the Palestinian Authority? Is it the 85% of the Palestinians that supported the massacre? Like, who are you making peace with here? Like, once you step down from this cloud and you're like, you're back, you got your feet on the earth, on the land. Who are you making peace with? Is it like, this is the bit I struggle with. Is it the ones that were handing out the candy? Is it the ones that were slitting with the throat? Is it the ones that were beating the corpse? Who are you making peace with?
Palestinians, as well as Israelis, support a brutality towards the other side because they don't see another way possible.
Sorry, I'm just going to stop you there. Show me anything comparable on the Israeli side.
Well, over 80% of Israelis either support what's happening in Gaza, or they support stronger attacks in Gaza. Similar number to Palestinians.
It's not comparable. It is not comparable. One is the stated objectives of the conflict in Gaza is the retrieval of the hostages and the removal of Hamas. Yeah, it's not the rape and slaughter of civilians, which is what we're discussing. So I'm saying, give me anything comparable to that. Corpses dragged through bodies.
It's certainly not a one-for-one comparison, but I would also say it's not comparison in terms of the numbers. If you look at, you've had thousands of times more babies killed in Gaza than in Israel on October 7th. You have
Wouldn't
hundreds
argue
times
with
more,
that.
you have
I
hundreds
wouldn't.
times more. Hmm?
I wouldn't argue with anyone. Yes, there are
Right,
more
right.
dead
And you've had
Palestinians.
100 times more civilians killed in Gaza than on October 7th. So I agree, it's not comparable. You could look at it both ways. Many would say Israelis are acting more brutal because just look at the numbers. And one would say, well, the intention is different. Their means of killing them is different, right? So we don't go and raid a village and shoot people point blank. That's true. But we just bomb buildings that have civilians in them. And that's just for the ends justify the means, essentially. Yeah, they're different. But at the end of the day, what we're seeing is humans are capable of supporting the death and destruction of another population. A, because it gives them a sense of vengeance. B, they think it's going to make them safer. This is true with humans across the board. Um, if we look at Palestinian public opinion throughout the years, it is constantly changing. We at one point had a situation where over 50% of Palestinians supported a two-state solution because they were hopeful that it could happen. Hope has been lost since Oslo, and now that number is in the teens, right? So Palestinians have, after decades of despair, have become radicalized. If we can create hope, right? If Palestinians can see a path to living a good and prosperous life, the number of Palestinians supporting atrocities against Jews will decrease significantly. So again, both Israelis and Palestinians will change how they view the other if they see a path towards peace that is possible. So that's why I remain hopeful. And I don't even know how long it will take. Palestinians want change now. I tell Palestinians, listen, it's possible. In order for you to get what you want, it might take generations, right?
But
And I
what
actually
they
believe that.
want is not what you want. What they want is your house in Israel. What they want is from the river to the sea. What they want is the return of the refugees. What they want is not what you're describing. What they want is the end of Israel.
What they want changes dependent on the conditions that they are raised in. So again, it used
So
to be 50%.
the conditions in the West Bank today are considerably better than they were at the time of the Oslo Accords. I go to the West Bank, Yehuda v'Shomron, all the time. Whenever I'm in Israel, I go there to see Palestinians and to see my Israeli friends. And you cannot describe those material conditions as bad. They are very, like, I'm usually in a little tiny cheap rental car, which barely makes it up the hill, and I'm creating a traffic jam of BMW M7s, Range Rovers, incredible Palestinian cars with Palestinian plates. I'm driving through Palestinian villages with huge villas. The material conditions in the West Bank are good. They're like any other developing nation. It's not comparable to Renana, but there's a lot of money flowing into the territory, and the change in the material condition has not changed the aspirations at all. The aspirations are from the river to the sea. Hamas are explicit with this. The Palestinian Authority are explicit with this. Every Palestinian that I speak to is explicit with this. They see all of the land as theirs.
The material conditions is not the only condition we need to look at. I think a more important condition is the psychological condition. Um, so when Palestinians need to wait at checkpoints to go visit their family or to go to school, or when they are subject to searches or abuse by Israeli soldiers, when they feel like they have no hope towards
Adar,
statehood, independence, or justice, this takes a psychological toll on people. It's not only environmental conditions.
can I ask you just one quick
It's
question?
not only
Just to,
material conditions we need to look at. We need to look at psychological conditions, and the psychological conditions has been one of a greater sense of despair than ever before. With the expansion of settlements, it comes more checkpoints, more military presence. That military presence, yes, it keeps Jews living in the West Bank safe, but it's inherently oppressive towards Palestinians. So the psychological conditions have not improved. They've continuously deteriorated for decades.
so can I ask a quick question on that? Because I'm assuming you've spent a fair amount of time in Palestinian parts of the what you'd call the West Bank. Is that?
I served as a soldier in the West Bank. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the majority of Palestinians are not passing through a checkpoint on a daily basis. As a general rule, would you agree with that or disagree with that statement?
I actually don't know the numbers, but I know that you cannot go through the West Bank without checkpoints.
If you're on an Israeli road or a Palestinian road?
You have roads for Israelis, you have roads for Palestinians.
Yes,
but
I'm saying if the Palestinians are on Palestinian roads, are they passing through checkpoints? Or is it when they cross onto an Israeli road? Like you're saying, you can't pass through the West Bank.
Yeah, you cannot travel through the West Bank without stopping at checkpoints. And this in Hebron, you have dozens of checkpoints in the surrounding areas. There's traveling to see family members can sometimes take hours. Yeah, the checkpoints takes a psychological
toll. So the checkpoints are going into. So if you're going into an Israeli area from a Palestinian area, there will be a checkpoint. So in Hebron, if you're crossing from the Jewish area, which has 3% of Hebron, into the 97% of Hebron, you'll have to pass through a checkpoint. If you're not passing through that and you're just driving through a Hebron road out of Hebron, you don't pass through a checkpoint. Like you can go and Google Maps, you can see for yourself, but you can take the satellite view. The Israeli maps are better though; they've got better clarity. They probably shouldn't.
Right, but so again, there are ways you could travel in the West Bank, shorter distances where you won't stop at a checkpoint. But again, they cannot travel freely in the West Bank without stopping at checkpoints. There's places that have curfew. There's places that have military presence. Some checkpoints are actually just popped up sporadically. I was involved in some of those. So hold on, there's a plane. There are 707 checkpoints in the West Bank currently. 140 of those were added since October 7th, but that would bring the number before October 7th to 550. If you don't think that this creates a psychological toll on Palestinians, that they are controlled by another military presence, a military that often doesn't treat them with dignity and respect, yes, that takes a psychological toll. No population wants to live.
I just want to pull you on some of these stats. When you count 500, are you counting the gates into an Israeli settlement as an example, as a checkpoint?
I'm actually not sure. I would need to look. I would need to look at those numbers. But again, what I'm saying is undeniable. Palestinians cannot travel freely without Israeli checkpoints. They simply cannot, and they see a slow loss of land through expansion of settlements. They see an increase in military presence. Their interaction with the military are generally not fun. It's not soldiers treating them buddy. I served. I've seen it. So yeah, there is a psychological toll that's taken by the lack of hope. It increases the sense of despair. This military presence of people who don't treat them with dignity and respect, as well as settlers that also often abuse Palestinians with not all too much accountability. So to think that, okay, so some of them drive nice cars, some of them have nice homes, that doesn't take away the psychological toll, what it means to live in a place where you're controlled by another nation's military.
So I think it will probably end up going round and round. My experience in recent years, I don't know when you served, I don't know if it was Intifada, I don't know how old you are. You could be quite.
2008 to 2011 is when I served. Okay, and I spent a fair bit of time in the West Bank.
Okay, so my experience in from largely around that point onwards has been very different. I came I became religious later in life. I grew up in a left-wing working class community.
Right? Wasn't your father a Marxist?
Yeah, exactly. I was raised in a Marxist household. Yeah, cool. We've probably come very different paths. We've crossed each other's along the way.
No, my dad's a right-wing Zionist, just so you know. My whole family. I have settler cousins. I come from a very right-wing family. And I'm 10th generation Israeli, a very historic Israeli family as well.
So Corbyn didn't wake my father up to anti-Semitism on the left, but October the 7th has. So he's not a recovering Marxist, but he's realizing that there are definite problems with his team. But there's irrelevant for this conversation. So to bring it back, we've probably been I've been going to the spending a lot of time in Yehuda Shomron, and my experience is not as you describe it. That's why your numbers of 700 checkpoints is just, it makes no sense to me unless you're actually counting.
But just, this is your experience as a Jew, though. There's
this
Jewish
is
roads
with a British passport who travels extensively in Palestinian areas.
Right, but your British passport gives you A, the British passport, B, the fact that you're
missing what I'm saying. I'm not. Obviously, I race through a checkpoint much faster.
Yeah.
Right. I will put my kippah on. I will have my British passport, and I will pass through far easier than any Palestinian would. There's no question of that. I'm literally saying what I see with my eyes. I don't see what you're describing. I'm not saying that your argument that there is a psychological impact on the Palestinians. I'm not arguing against that. I just don't see what you're describing. From my perspective, when I'm there, what I see is probably the best material conditions the Palestinians have experienced ever. I don't know if you'd agree or disagree with that statement.
I need to look at the numbers, but I think Palestinian citizens of Israel are probably living a fair bit better. But
100%. So I'm just talking about the Arabs that are living in the West Bank. So not Israeli Arabs.
Yeah, I mean, better than Syria and Jordan. I would say not better than Saudi Arabia, UAE.
Also better than 70 years ago, better than 100 years ago. I'm saying materially they're doing better. Yeah. And so that hasn't changed. So the improvement in the material conditions hasn't, which is my argument, it hasn't changed anything. What's remained is that, I think it was Sinwar said it. He said, I don't know if I can say this, but basically they are nursed on the desire to liberate all of the land. From the cradle to the grave, that is the core narrative is the Jews came, they stole your land, they stole your home, and you must do everything you can to liberate it in return. That is whether it's the Palestinian Authority textbooks, whether it's the UNRWA editions, whether it's the family homes, the overwhelming narrative in Palestinian society is we will liberate our homeland. And we will bring the refugees back.
Yeah, so I would actually say if we were to have a conversation about problems in Palestinian society, I think we would actually probably be in agreement by and large. I think where we're in disagreement is the critique of Israel, right? So, and we spoke about this distinction at the beginning that I'm constantly criticizing both sides. I'm constantly supporting aspects of both sides. So
we agree on that then. That's good. So now
to
a state, who is it that you're going to make peace with? It's not about the material conditions. It's not. Is that the people that you've just described, who are in agreement with the Palestinian society, largely wants to liberate all of the land, overwhelmingly supports what happened on October the 7th. Who is it that you're making peace with? How do you make peace with that? How do you make peace with someone that wants to drive you into the sea, that believes that you've taken something that is theirs, and they will sacrifice their own children to redeem it?
So I feel like I already answered this question, that I feel like Palestinians, given the right opportunity, will accept that opportunity and will stop the fight if they can.
So what is that opportunity? That's what so it's not a material opportunity. So I hate all this.
It's I don't get it. Well, first of all, I wouldn't entirely take out material opportunity. I just looked it up because I wasn't sure, but the unemployment rate in the West Bank is 13%, which is quite high. In Gaza, I think it's closer to 50% prior to October 7th, which is extremely high. But I think material conditions definitely do play a role in it, but a lot of it is a sense of justice and dignity. So as we saw, there was a situation in the past where over 50% of Palestinians supported two states. So we see how public sentiment can change given different conditions. So if there's a clear path towards peace, and I think the best way to do this is actually a federation, because a majority of both Jews and Palestinians want the land to remain whole. Okay, well, let's take the energy of the people and what they actually want. Let's keep the land whole. Let's find a way where both populations can have a sense of self-determination, where populations can ensure their security, and have a sense of justice. So I think a federation can help us achieve this. So it needs to come with feeling like there is a path forward. I think there's certain good faith measures that can be taken, but to think that um, Palestinian sentiment is somehow uh, static and immutable and never changing, I mean, the numbers just show us a very different story. So we really need to be asking ourselves, how can we create? Jews want security, we deserve security. Palestinians want justice, they deserve justice. Many of them, the way they describe justice seems more like vengeance. We need to, they're going to need to come to terms with the fact that they're not going to get full justice the way they describe it. But there, you can create a path forward towards peace that will get Palestinians to buy into it and understand that violence against Jews is not to their benefit. And through peace, they can live much better lives.
So I believe it's possible, but I don't believe in the way you're portraying it. I believe the only chance we have for peace, and is if there is a denazification, a de-radicalization of Palestinian society, a taking over of the literature that's printed in schools, the curriculum, etc. Now that can't come from Israel. That it can't be Israel that comes in and says, "Here's a new curriculum." At the moment, it's been bankrolled by forces that want to see a destabilized Middle East. It's been bankrolled by Iran, by Qatar, by Turkey. Now, history is we've been presented with a unique position for the first time in anyone's lifetime, where there is a movement within the Muslim world to normalize relations with Israel. And so if you see the severing of the ties between Iran and the Palestinians, and it has to come from the Palestinians, it has to be the Palestinians that want this change. If you see relations switched from Iran, Turkey, Qatar to the Emiratis, the Saudis, etc., and you look to rebuild Gaza, do something with the PA, whereby you have moderate forces who are interested in peace, then potentially 10 years, 20 years, but after many, many years, you could potentially have a land which is fertile enough for peace to sprout from. But every single Hamasnik, every single civilian that crossed over into Israel on October the 7th had been educated and raised in a system where they are taught to hate Jews, where they are taught that they must sacrifice their own land to liberate, sacrifice their own lives to liberate the land. So I'm not saying that peace isn't possible, but I'm saying with the people that are currently in charge of Gaza, with the people that are currently in charge of the West Bank, with the education that the overwhelming majority of Palestinians have now passed through. So if half of Gaza is under the age of 18, that means every single Palestinian has basically been raised through schools run by Hamas in Gaza. And that's not going to create a society which is very tolerant and peaceful with their it's going to create a society that's going to carry out October the 7th, and then those that don't participate in it, the majority are going to celebrate it and agree with it. And so I don't think there's disagreement and that peace is possible. What I think we're disagreeing is you believe, from what I'm hearing, the people that are currently either running Gaza or living in Gaza, they're the ones that can bring about that peace. And that's why I think I disagree with you. Unless I'm misunderstanding.
Yeah, I mean, I where we're in further agreement is that I do think there needs to be some kind of a de-radicalization process. I think that achieving that through force is, let's say, I would say equally likely to achieving it through diplomacy. It's just diplomacy costs far less life. So I would always support a solution that doesn't cause tens of thousands, and who knows, when all is said and done, maybe hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths. I think, and it's unclear that when all is said and done, we very well may be in a situation where we have over 100,000 dead Palestinian civilians, and yet we don't have peace. So again, I think we're choosing a path of force with no clear understanding of this will even get us to the goal of peace. And I think diplomacy is actually equally as likely to get us there. Again, through this coalition we're building in the Middle East, through international pressure, through making some concessions. Not going to sit here and say that I think there's a clear path, but I think it's equally likely to do it through diplomacy than through force. Just one causes much less harm.
So would you agree
Yeah,
with the statement that most Palestinians and most Israelis, if they could have their objectives achieved, would rather do it via diplomacy than conflict on both sides?
I would say yes. I think it's just harder to imagine what that looks like. Again, I keep going back to this innate thing we have, that violence often is seen as the simplest solution. And not to get too deep into evolutionary biology, but if you look at how we evolved, we were the offspring of very violent Homo sapiens. It wasn't the peaceful ones that survived. We used to live in a world where you would come across a rival tribe, you couldn't speak the same language. Diplomacy is almost impossible when you can't speak the same language. So we evolved in such a way, you see a threat, it's either you kill them or they kill you. This is now in our DNA, right? So I do think most would prefer diplomacy, but we're wired in such a way where we're led towards force because it just seems like a clearer path. It's in our DNA. So, I urge for us to take a step back and not act based on our instinct and try to really look for a path forward that is not going to cause such a toll on human life. We are now in a situation, we have evolved culturally in such a way where we could communicate with one another, and we don't need to live by the sword for eternity. And this is how I think society needs to move towards, and this is what I will continue to advocate for. And I don't think any amount of harm I see is going to change my opinion on this, because what I know for certain is that change is certain. And what can we do to have change happen in a favorable direction?
So I agree with some of what you've just said, but I think I think you kind of framed it perfectly for your perspective, whereas peace is the number one objective for you. And I think the number one objective for most Israelis is survival. And I think the number one objective for Palestinians is, in their language, justice. So usually that would be the taking of all the land. And peace is actually secondary. Both parties want peace. All people want peace. That's the one thing I've learned. I've spoke to some of the most I've spoke to ISIS people who've told me they want peace. That is a very, very easy thing for most people to get.
What does peace look like? Yeah.
And so I think, sadly, in an ideal world, it would go exactly as you've described. The pen would be mightier than the sword. Diplomacy would take precedent and be victorious over conflict, over struggle. However, October the 7th was largely inflicted upon those that subscribe to your view.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually those that are now sacrificing their lives at a much greater number than any other community are those communities from Yehuda v'Shomron who are in the Gaza, in the front lines, fighting to keep everybody else in the country safe. And sometimes the threat is so considerable, the ideology so deeply rooted, that you can't talk your way out of conflict. The people who were sacrificed were the peace activists. The people who were not sacrificed, slaughtered, were the peace activists, were the people who shared the exact sentiment that you're describing. And the price is too high, in my opinion. The price is too high to not engage, which brings it back to the subject of the debate, to not engage militarily with Hamas. If you do not end Hamas, then they will, as they've told us again and again, carry out October the 7th repeatedly. It'll be October the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. They will keep going again and again and again until they've liberated all of the land. This is what they tell us. So the only option we have is to defend ourselves, is to prevent that from happening, is to prevent them from killing more children, more elderly, more innocent lives. That's the only option. We are, the Israeli government has a moral obligation.
Just a few points. It's true that those who were primarily killed on October 7th did subscribe to a similar ideology to my own, but that doesn't speak in any way to the truth of their ideology. Hamas very well could have attacked an extremely right-wing village, and that wouldn't have spoken against what right-wingers say. That just happens to be where the communities they attacked happen to be left-wing. Those fighting in Gaza are not primarily from Yehuda and Shimon. I think most combat soldiers live in Israel proper.
Sorry, the casualties of it's not most, but 40% of those that have fallen have been from Yehuda and Shimon.
Is that right?
Disproportionate, yeah.
Interesting.
I think it was largely that alone.
Now, again, I think if we look through history, we've seen quite a few examples of terror organizations who actually then became legitimate governments. I know it's hard to see that happening with an organization as brutal as Hamas, but we have seen this happen time and time again. So again, I think there is a potential military solution. I'm not going to say there isn't, but I think the likelihood of us achieving it militarily, which has been our primary means of trying to achieve security, is just as likely to succeed as diplomacy. So again, I'm going to say
to that point, because I can see what the military solution looks like. The military solution we're witnessing, and you describe it as disproportionate. In my opinion, it is not disproportionate. The reason the civilian casualties is high is because Egypt's not opening the border. A mass force of civilians and engage not to leave areas of conflict and engaging Israel from densely populated areas, from the safe zones. So the reason the civilian casualty is so high is because of those factors. But I can see that bringing about the end of Hamas. I can see Hamas being eliminated. We've already taken out estimates as much as 60% of their capabilities.
I think it's significantly less than 60%, but I know Israel has reason to say that it's high because they want to have a moral victory, and I don't think we've taken out 60% of their capabilities, but I guess time will tell. It's easier to imagine how to have peace through force, right? You just kill everybody who's not peaceful. I get it. That's another reason why we often tend towards supporting forceful solutions. But when you have a population, or Hamas is so heavily embedded within civilian infrastructure, and where it's not just an organization, it's an ideology. And as far as we know, the more harm we cause Palestinians, the more radical they become. It's unclear that we're not, it doesn't seem like we're destroying an ideology. We very well may be continuing to support it. What does a more diplomatic approach look like? Again, it's much harder to envision, but I think that Hamas leadership are more so opportunist than they are ideological. I think if Hamas didn't have any other choice but to make concessions, then they would. And I think that is possible to achieve, again, through international pressure, through Israel making some concessions. If them remaining in power will mean they need to reform, then they will reform. So again, I don't think there's it's not as cut and dry, say, just kill them all and we have peace. No, diplomacy is a little bit more complicated. It's more sophisticated, but I actually think the likelihood of it being achieved through diplomacy is, again, equally similar, just with a much lower death toll. Again, we've seen, and just to show how the Middle East is already changing. Who would have thought that Jews can travel to the UAE and be safe? In fact, one can make the case that you're safer as a Jew in the UAE than you are in New York. Who would have thought that possible? Who would have thought it possible 10 years ago that we're normalizing ties with Saudi Arabia? right? So the Middle East is changing. To think that this change cannot impact the entire region and that you can create a situation where Hamas is forced through pressure to the negotiating table and forced to make concessions and over time normalized as a legitimate government. I know this is triggering. People don't want to think of this as a possibility, but it certainly is. And we've seen it time and time again throughout history. Terror organizations have become normalized and are now actual governments. I feel like we are going back and forth on this point. I did at the very beginning say that I wanted to make another case about soldiers who are acting recklessly. So I would like to get to that if you're cool with it.
Just respond to one thing you said, and then
Yeah,
sure.
Sure.
So you said something which I think is basically the symbolizes just how vast the chasm between us is. You said that you think that Hamas are more opportunists than ideological. And that is a staggering statement for me to hear, because I know Ikhwan Muslimin, I know Hamas, and they're as ideological can be. They make the Nazis look like opportunists. And yet, we were able to uproot the Nazi ideology. We were able to destroy the power base, the military base of the Nazis. And Nazism has been pushed to the very fringes of most societies, from almost ruling the world. So you can absolutely not just destroy a political military force, but you can never completely kill an idea. Once an idea is out there, it's out there forever. But right. you can take away its the wind from its sail. You can push it into the fringes, into the shadows. And there's no reason why that can't happen. But to describe Hamas as opportunists over ideologues is actually, I think, just like, it perfectly captures how differently we view the conflict, how differently we view Palestinian society, and certainly Hamas.
Yeah, and I don't know how we resolve this disagreement, but I would go on to say most people in general, I think their ideology is generally not as strong as they believe it to be, and given certain conditions, they will change their ideology.
I think you haven't met that many religious people. That's all I will say. One thing that
this is an anecdote.
Every Jew should respect the iman, the faith of the Muslim, of the ummah. They have incredible faith.
Well, we're not asking people to denounce Islam, right? Like there's many.
What I was going to say is Hamas is an Islamic movement who sacrifices their lives for their ideology. I wouldn't sacrifice my life for my ideologies, like in the sense of like blow myself up, or it's
but the continual violent resistance against Israel is not written in the Quran. So I would agree with you if the conversation was, can we get Hamas to denounce Islam? I would say absolutely not. I don't think that is realistic. Can we get them to reform how they perceive Islam, or how they justify the use of violence against Israel? I think that that's certainly the case. When we look at Muslim sentiment around the world, it's different from country to country. Culture often supersedes religion. And just some quick numbers, right? If you look at a 2014 Pew poll, showed that over 80% of Palestinians support some form of Sharia. That was actually concerning to see. In Kazakhstan, that number, also a Muslim country, was 25%. Two different countries with two very different opinions on something like Sharia. So culture often supersedes religion. I don't think Hamas needs to denounce Islam, but I think there's a version of Islam that can recognize Israel's right to exist. In fact, you do have some people making the case that Islam in itself is Zionist, because Islam says that the land of Israel is for the Jewish people, right? So there are ways in which you could maintain your religion, make small modifications to how you see things. I think this is all possible.
But it's not possible with Hamas. That's all I'm saying. I agree with everything that you've said. There are Muslim Zionists who base their views on certain ayahs in the Quran. There are different madhabs. There are different interpretations. But Hamas are Ikhwan Muslimin. Hamas believe in the Khilafah. Hamas believe in jihad, like in terms of violent jihad, and taking land with the sword. Hamas are not. They're ideologically. We're talking about the ideology of Hamas is completely different to the ideology of a moderate Muslim living in Kazakhstan or in Morocco. It's a very, very different belief system. There's no disagreement there. I'm just saying that is what you're dealing
yeah,
with.
I agree. It currently is. I think we could also look at past examples, like the Crusades. You had a very violent version of Christianity that ruled Europe for hundreds of years. It didn't need to get absolutely decimated militarily. It actually reformed naturally, right? So that's just one example. And again, that did take time. Time happens to move faster now in today's world, thankfully. So again, we see other examples, and again, Europe is still primarily Christian. It's just not a Christianity that supports violence. America is a Christian nation that was founded, with the idea that slavery is okay. This was supported by the Bible. Most Christians today do not support slavery. Culture supersedes religion. So again, the fact that change is constant allows me to remain hopeful that we could continue to change in a positive direction. And I will always support a path of diplomacy over violence unless we've exhausted all other options and we see that they don't work. But here's the thing. We have not come nearly close to exhausting all other options. We haven't come to the negotiating table in over a decade, and we've done a whole lot to just prolong the conflict, fuel Palestinian extremism. So to think that violence is the option, we haven't even begun. We haven't even scratched the surface of nonviolent diplomacy. There's no way I could get behind a violent approach unless I've seen that all other options have been exhausted.
So you don't think we should be in Gaza?
I would say that if we do decide to go into Gaza, we should be much more cautious with how we're doing it. I think the amount of airstrikes is hard to justify. I don't think the death toll justifies the military gain. And
to that point, there with the airstrikes, would you? I mean, I don't, but would you agree with the UN reports that are saying like 60 to 70% of buildings in Gaza? I'm laughing because I don't believe it, not because I think it's funny, but 60 to 70% of buildings in Gaza have now been destroyed or are unlivable. Would you agree with that number largely?
I mean that wouldn't surprise me. That would I would need to look at the reports, but yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. I think you have like half the Gazan population is now homeless.
So now take to go take that further. So 2 million Gazans, over 50 to 70% of the buildings have been bombed, if the UN report is correct, which I don't believe it is, but let's just say for the sake of the argument it is.
Real quick about the UN. The UN, I think there's been clear examples of certain biases that they have. I don't think there's been clear examples of them outright lying, right? So
would they get that information from Gaza? That's why I don't trust that. The UN don't have
well, yeah, I would want to see where they get their sources from, but also drone and satellite footage can also give you an estimate of similar things. You don't need to rely on Hamas for those numbers. There's other ways to reach these conclusions.
Yeah, anyway, so let's say it's correct for the sake of the exercise. We would expect to see, by that reckoning, 1 million dead Palestinians. Yeah.
No.
Why not? If Israel was indiscriminately bombing to the extent that 60 to 70% of the building stock has been destroyed, why wouldn't you expect there to be civilians in those buildings? Buildings house civilians.
I think, again, we spoke about this at the very beginning. You mentioned certain precautions Israel has taken. But I agree with that. Yeah.
So Israel isn't indiscriminately bombing. To coming back to proportionality, Israel is doing everything it can to minimize.
No. So there's the disagreement. I think there are certain precautions Israel's taking, but to go and say that they're doing everything in their power to minimize, I think that's a stretch, and the numbers there
No
don't
one's
lie.
saying that. No one's
Well,
saying that Israel is. What
you
I'm
just
saying is Israel is taking serious precautions to minimize civilian casualties, more so than any other military. That's what I'm saying. I'm not
I'm
saying
not sure it's more than any other military. I
okay,
think that
can you give me an example of any military going to the same sort of lengths as firing from the sky, etc.?
we don't have a comparable conflict because you don't have any place that is heavily
Aleppo,
as what?
Aleppo, any of the major Iraqi cities, Afghanistan,
Um, I, I,
Kabul.
it's a little bit different because of how the militants there are placed, but I don't think you have as high of a death rate. You don't have a 9-to-1 death rate there. And even if you were to say that Aleppo was similar,
Sorry,
wait,
9 to
wait,
1
wait,
death
wait.
rate.
But even if you can make the
I
case
don't
that
agree with
Aleppo,
that.
even if we were to say that Aleppo was similar, um,
Not
that
similar, a million times worse. There was no consideration of civilians.
no, I actually don't think you looked into. I'm not sure you looked into that so deeply. I don't think they had a greater than 9-to-1 civilian to
You
militant
are
death.
saying 9 to 1. It's not 9 to 1.
Well, I came with the numbers, with the receipts. You didn't contest.
Okay, and I asked you about those receipts, and you didn't even know how many names were issued on it.
They release all the names. Those
Yeah,
names are.
I said I was aware of one which had just under 7,000. I wasn't aware of another, and you said I think it's updated.
Fine. Wait, hold on. But let's just stick with the 7,000. You think since then somehow they managed to stop killing civilians, and now their airstrikes are just killing militants? That's 7,000. And again, I can't do all of this research right now while we're live. But that 7,000 gives you enough data to reach a conclusion. What would make you think that now, when we're at 20 or 30,000, somehow the ratio is so much different?
So
What are they doing now that they weren't doing then?
From what I understood from what you said, and I may be misrepresenting what you're saying that. So I'm not trying to straw man you here, so correct me if I'm wrong. I've misremembered that the 9-to-1 ratio came from there were 90% of the casualties were women or children. 10% were male. So I'm just going to ask you. So first and foremost, if that's what you said, you're saying that every male killed therefore had to be a militant, which is a terrorist, which is like doesn't make any sense to me because not everyone in Gaza is a terrorist, certainly not all the males.
No. The list that was released showed 70% were women and children. So the 30% were men. There's no reason to believe that all 100% of the 30% are somehow militant.
Okay, so you're then saying that a percentage of those, so to get to your 10%, are militant, terrorists. Yeah, that's your. Now I'm going to ask you: does that seem plausible?
I would even say that that's a conservative estimate, honestly.
You would say that's a good. And what do you consider a child as well in that counting?
Well, the way the way they look at child is anybody under the age of 18. The case could be made that some of the children killed were militants. But again, when we look at the breakdown of the numbers, and again, I could pull up a graph here, and this graph is of the 7,000. The graph that I have, you see that some amount of the children.
Who's the graph by the way? Who's the graph by? Just to help me contextualize.
This was a graph that Max Blumenthal put together of all the ages. Okay. No. Your laughter is committing a genetic fallacy. You don't need to agree with Max Blumenthal and his approach. That doesn't mean the graph he put out is false.
Would you trust the graph from Goebbels?
The graph.
No, straight question. Would you if someone presented Nazi propaganda to you, would you accept it unquestioningly, or would you because it's a genetic fallacy?
I think the right way to achieve truth is to not look at the person, but look at the claim being made and investigate it. The graph he put together is based on the numbers that the Gaza Ministry of Health put out. Again, he put it out publicly. It's open for public scrutiny. Millions of people have an incentive to try to disprove this. You could look at the graph he put together, find a discrepancy, call him out. This certainly this did not happen, you could look at the graph. All he did was take the list that the Gaza Ministry of Health put out, and then did a bar chart based on that. If you think he's lying, it wouldn't be hard to prove that he's lying. It would actually be very easy.
It's impossible. It's impossible to prove that he's lying because we don't have access to Hamas's number. You're saying this is
this is based off the 7,000. The chart he put together is based on the 7,000.
But if you don't, okay, Adar, let's say Hamas say that 7,000 have been killed, but let's say the number's actually greater. Let's say it's actually
now it's closer to 30,000.
And let's say it's actually 15,000. And 7,000 they've selected to make it look disproportionate, but they've ignored the others. Now, I'm not saying that's what's happened, but you'd have no way of verifying that because you don't know who's not in the list. You don't know who is in the list, and you don't know who's not in the list. You don't know
you would. You actually would because
how would you know who's not on the list?
I'll tell you. I'll tell you how. All Israel would need to do is show one dead Hamas militant that was killed that wasn't reported on. And then they could cast doubt on anything the Gaza Ministry of Health is saying. There's a lot of incentive to discredit the Gaza Ministry of Health. A lot.
How would Israel do that? Let's say Hamas.
They're in Gaza. You don't think they have the ability to? You don't think Israel has recovered any bodies of dead Hamas militants since the start of the war? All you need to do is prove that there have been militants killed that were excluded from the list, and then you could cast doubt on anything the Gaza Ministry of Health says. There's a lot of incentive to cast this doubt, yet they were not successfully able to do this.
It took us weeks to ID our own casualties, and like literally weeks. IDing dead people is very difficult. If they're not carrying an ID card, IDing someone is incredibly. Anyway, it's a bit of a pointless conversation. This literal bit where we're going now because it's inconsequential to the debate. I do not trust Hamas's numbers. You do trust Hamas's numbers. I can find a million ways how Hamas could misrepresent the figures. You think they can't misrepresent the figures. I think I question sources because I think they have biases and spread propaganda. You describe that as a genetic fallacy that I suffer from.
Correct. So it seems like your way of understanding what's true is if Israel says something, you assume it to be true. If an Israeli says something, you assume it to be true. If a Palestinian says something, you assume it to be untrue. And if a Palestinian organization says something, you assume it to be untrue. That's not going to lead you to accurate results.
So that's not that's a straw man of me. I believe that Israel is accountable to its judiciary. I believe there are laws in place that mean that if information is misrepresented, there are systems within Israeli society to hold people to account for that. I do not believe the same thing exists within Hamas. I do not believe. I trust Israel's Ministry of Health because if they misrepresent, there are consequences. I do not trust Hamas's Ministry of Health because there are no checks and balances, and the people who run it are the same people who perpetrated the atrocity of the 7th of October.
There is a check and balance, and it is a very simple one. It is the fact that we are not only fighting a war over military gain, it is over PR as well. Israel has immense incentive, and not only Israel, anybody who's pro-Israel has immense incentive to discredit and disprove the Gaza Ministry of Health, yet they have unsuccessfully been able to do so. And then when you look at the Gaza Ministry of Health in past conflicts, you see that they've reported accurately. So based on this alone, it's not a reach to conclude that they seem to be reporting accurately. Now, Israel Health Ministry also has not been proven to spread disinformation, but Israel has many, many instances of spreading disinformation since October 7th and all the way from 1948. And I have a whole list of them. I could get into it. I could spend the next 30 minutes reading off disinformation bits that Israel's put out. But to say that you trust Israel because there's some checks and balances, and you don't believe Hamas because there isn't. No, we need to look at the history. We need to look at claims being made, what's been proven, what's been disproven,
So
and if you do this
do
and you
you
do this
think that
honestly,
do you think they're both as reliable as each other? Do you think Israel is as reliable as Hamas?
I think both Israel and Hamas have incentive to lie and a
To the
history of
same
doing
to
so.
the same extent, I'm just asking a straight question. Do you think to the same extent? Do you think there's an equivalency between the two
I
when it comes to
would,
the integrity of what they say?
yeah, I think it's actually quite similar. Yeah. hmm
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Okay,
I
so
mean,
that's
I did the research. I have a very long list of disinformation Israel has spread, a very long list. It made me sad to discover all of this. Um,
so
and
this,
again,
this is what I just want to. It's not that there's disinformation because every government, every country will suffer from this. It's whether they can be held accountable to that, whether there are ramifications for doing so from both the public and the legal system. And so when you look at what comes out of Hamas, from their founding charter to what their leaders say, to the information they put out, to announcing 500 dead, like literally 2 minutes after an Islamic Jihad
yeah, yeah,
rocket
yeah.
hit the Al
Mhm.
Ahli hospital. When you consider to make an equivalency and say you believe in the integrity of both is comparable, that for me is a staggering statement. I'm not saying that Israel hasn't lied, or the Israeli government hasn't lied, or that members of the Israeli military haven't lied. Of course, like all nations do this. It's
Okay.
whether it's the same. It's to do with how much confidence can we have in what they're both saying. And
Well,
you're saying as much confidence in Israel as Hamas, a literal genocidal jihadi Islamist ideology, terrorist movement. That's the bit that's blown my
yeah, yeah,
mind.
yeah. Based on the research I've done, I've looked into both, and both Hamas and Israel have a history of spreading disinformation to the point where they should not be taken at their word. The one organization that I have not yet been able to prove is spreading disinformation, interestingly, is the Gaza Ministry of Health. And I need to tell you, I was actually surprised to discover this because when researching it, I was almost certain that I would find them to be fabricating numbers, and I wasn't able to. Right.
So
So
the 500
I am
that
not ideologically driven here.
the
I
Gaza Ministry of Health, literally 5 minutes after the Al Ahli bombing, where I counted max, and this has been very generous, 13 bodies, because they put them out in body bags. They said within minutes, the Gaza Ministry of Health, 500 dead. And then they upgraded it to 1,000.
Yeah, you're
That
talking
was
about
the Ministry of
when the
Health.
actually, in fact, I'm happy you bring this up because the one area based on my research where I saw something that was awfully suspicious was exactly what you're saying. It was the speed in which they were able to say how many dead. It seems like what they did was an estimate, and again, then it takes time. They count the bodies, they release it. The speed in which they reported, I would say is awfully suspicious. But the more important thing to look at is the names and ID numbers of those that they release. It's
So,
out there. It's out there for public scrutiny, and public scrutiny of not only Israel but the whole pro-Israel camp. A whole lot of people want
okay,
to
Adar, I'm
want to
going to set you a
discredit.
challenge. I'm going to set you a
Mhm.
challenge. Can you think of any way that Hamas could doctor those numbers? Just give it 30 seconds. Can you come up with any? I've come up with a few already myself, but I just want
Yeah,
to
yeah.
know.
No. I could, but I could also come up with a way in which they could be caught doctoring those numbers, and that just hasn't happened. So yeah, there is a way they could try to cheat, and there is a way in which they can be caught. They have not yet been caught. There's a lot of motivation to catch them lying, and the fact that it hasn't happened should give us an idea that they very well may be telling the truth here. Um, so yeah, and I looked into this. I didn't go into this with the impression that they're telling the truth. I researched it and wasn't able to find a clear example of them making up names and numbers. In fact, I was surprised by how consistent they've been through multiple conflicts, consistent to the point where their numbers are similar to what Israel reports and what the UN reports. One can say, well, the stakes are higher now. Now they decided to lie. Okay, but there are ways to prove it. You could prove that there's people on the list that are still alive. We haven't found somebody still alive who is on that list. How can you prove that someone's alive? Social media, cell phone usage, video surveillance. There's ways to prove if somebody's alive after they're reported dead. We weren't able to do this. This list has gone under immense scrutiny, and yet it has not been found to be inaccurate.
I mean, I don't know if it has gone under the scrutiny you're suggesting. I don't know. I mean, I haven't looked into this.
Okay,
I'm actually going to look into it afterwards. It's gonna be my exercise this evening. But I'm assuming, I just want to check some things because you're saying a lot of things, and I want to make sure I understand. So you're saying that they released the ID and the number, and I'm assuming you said Israel has this. I'm assuming that's the Palestinian registry. Is that the registry you're talking about?
Yeah.
And so, do you know when deaths, for instance, are recorded, and like how frequently deaths are recorded? Do you know if there's any information other than the ID, the date of birth, and the name that's recorded? Because you could print a name, an ID, but it doesn't mean that person's necessarily dead. And it'd be very difficult to prove they are unless they travel.
No. It wouldn't be that. It wouldn't be that hard. The Israeli intelligence could very easily prove that there's fabrications on the list. Let me give you an example. They put a name and an ID number. All Israel needs to see is that that person is using their cell phone, using their social media, or show some video surveillance that they're still alive, and you could discredit the entire list. Israel.
So you're saying, just to understand what you're saying that Israel is able to match every person's ID to their cell phone in Gaza?
It doesn't need to be every to be a significant amount. Yeah, Israel has immense intelligence capabilities in Gaza.
Do you think that, or you know that? Because I don't know that, and it sounds staggering that they have that level of surveillance over Palestinians that they will be able to match some, like anyone or the majority or a large enough percentage of people that are registered as Palestinian to their telephone?
I will say with very high confidence that Israel has good enough surveillance over Gaza. They actually, Israel has the ability to tap every phone in Gaza.
That's different. I completely agree with that, but that's different to being able to match someone's cell phone to their ID number.
No, I mean, generally when people have phone plans, it's connected to a name and an ID number. It's not this isn't some like system where they're going up and picking up like in like a Nokia phone that drug dealers use that you can't prove. No, that's not true. Like that's just not how it works. They have the ability to disprove it if they were able to, and they have incentive to disprove it. PR is so important. Both Gaza and Israel are fighting over international support. There's so much incentive to try to disprove the Gaza Ministry of Health. Why wouldn't there be? The second you can cast doubt by finding an inaccuracy they say, you literally cast doubt on everything they say moving forward. So again, it wouldn't be that hard to prove. There's multiple ways you could do it. Again, you could do it through social media, you could do it through cell phone use, you could do it through video surveillance, and this hasn't happened yet. And again, I'm not really so ideologically driven here. The moment that does happen, I will come out and say the Gaza Ministry of Health has been proven to lie. We can no longer trust them. I don't have any love for them. And I was surprised to find out their accuracies, right? So again, my conclusions are simply based on the research I've done. If somebody can show me research to counter it, I will change my opinion here.
Okay, so I am going to look into it. I haven't.
Well, yeah. No, I'm happy. We could even do a round. We could even reflect on this, think about it, do more research, and then come back for another session. I know we're going nearly on 2 hours. I know people have been wanting to hear. I said I wanted to present another case. Do you have at least 20 more minutes?
We can do that. Yeah.
Okay. So soldiers are acting recklessly to the point where I will also state with very high confidence that unarmed Gazans are being executed. And this is hard for me to come out and acknowledge. And first, I reached this conclusion just based on my experience as an IDF soldier, which matches also my brother, who was an officer who also served in the West Bank. And it's also similar to experiences of dozens of other soldiers who have come out publicly. Many of them are reported on through breaking the silence. And again, you could cast doubt as to the intention behind breaking the silence, but there's a consistency into what many soldiers who have decided to come out publicly and state are. There is a culture in Israeli military that is counter to the code of conduct. Israeli code of conduct is really about reducing harm. Let me give you an example. If you're guarding and a Palestinian starts walking up to you, you yell at them to stop. If they don't stop, you yell at them to stop again. If they don't stop, you shoot in the air. If they don't stop, you shoot at their leg. This is what we're taught. This is a code of conduct that really is meant to reduce harm towards Palestinians. In practice, it very rarely plays out like that. In fact, there's a culture in the Israeli military where combat soldiers want to finish their service with killing a Palestinian. Some will describe it as killing a terrorist. Others will describe it as killing an Arab. I was in Golani. This was very much part of the culture. I saw many instances of soldiers going against the code of conduct and abusing their power. Now, what we saw in Gaza, we've seen many testimonials from Gazans coming out and saying, oh, and again, if we're seeing this in the West Bank during relative quiet, think about the anger we have after October 7th. It's fair to assume that with this anger, there's going to be a greater abuse of power. So we've seen many testimonials from Gazans saying that they've seen people waving white flags being killed. Maybe they're making it up. It's possible. We've seen videos of people, civilians walking and being shot, some with white flags being shot. One can make the case this is Hamas, right? You could cast doubt on these claims. But then we had a very unfortunate incident where 3 hostages escaped and they waved white flags walking towards Israeli military. All 3 were shot dead. All 3 were shot dead. That almost certainly was not an isolated incident. That was just an example where we finally proved that it's happening, because that's not something that's easy to keep a secret. Israel had to admit that they killed their own people who were waving white flags. That same unit, interestingly, the same unit that killed those 3 hostages, on October 7th, killed 4 Palestinians. They uploaded a photo on social media of these Palestinians with guns next to them, dead. They said, we just killed terrorists. Drone footage later confirmed, and we could look at this video, it's hard to watch, that those 4 Palestinians got on their knees and surrendered. They were unarmed, and all 4 of them were shot, and then guns were placed next to them to take the photos. That's the same unit that shot these 3 Israeli hostages. Another unfortunate incident, you had a situation in Jerusalem where there was a terror attack. An armed Israeli shot the terrorists. The military then saw this guy with a gun. They thought he was the terrorist. He got to his knees and surrendered. A soldier came up to him and executed him. When they asked that soldier why he did that, he said he just wanted to get the X on his gun. You get an X on your gun when you kill somebody, right? These are clear examples of Israeli soldiers killing unarmed people, whether they're unarmed civilians, which that still is a war crime. If you shoot an unarmed militant, it's still a war crime. Many cases, they're not militants, they're being shot. This is a level of recklessness. There's close to no accountability when this happens, and this is pervasive throughout the military culture. So this is a form of excessiveness that needs to be widely condemned, not only from the Israeli public, from the pro-Israel camp, and there needs to be a lot more done by Israel to stop this from happening.
Okay, so I think one of the biggest issues I have with what you've said isn't the substance, but it's what you do with that. So you use it to tar 170,000 people. So you will say that a soldier did X, therefore this is endemic. This is the culture of the IDF. They have a culture of wanting to get a kill before they leave. If that were the case, if everyone wanted a kill, there would be 170,000 dead Palestinians every year. There isn't. Hear me out. In the average year, there's around 100 around 100 Palestinians are killed, unless it's like this year where there's a conflict, or whenever there's an escalation, obviously that number goes up. But in the average year when there isn't a conflict, which I assume when you were serving, there wasn't a conflict. I assume, I might be wrong there, given the dates you gave me. If there isn't a conflict, you would expect there to be thousands and thousands and thousands of Palestinians killed every year. There isn't. There are very few Palestinians killed, and those that are killed are overwhelmingly carrying out terror attacks. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I don't think in a war where people's emotions are high, their fears are heightened, their anxieties, etc., that mistakes aren't going to happen. And I'm not naive enough to think that there won't be monsters that are serving in the IDF. Every nation has its monsters, and many monsters join the military. And in the time of a war, they will act on evil inclinations that they may have. So if you've got someone who is racist, bloodthirsty, then they are going to act on those in a time of war. I'm sure there are individuals. What I dislike about what you said is the way you then tar all Israelis with the actions of individuals, either the mistakes they've made that will haunt them to their grave, like in the instance you gave from Jerusalem, which I'm very aware of the innocent man who was shot. That Jew that shot another Jew, the Israeli that shot a fellow Israeli, is going to take that to his grave and will have nightmares for that for the rest of his life. Same with the 3 Israeli hostages that were shot in Gaza. And I'm sure it will be the case for many that have killed innocent. There undoubtedly have been innocent Palestinians killed mistakenly. And sadly, in some cases, there will be innocent Palestinians that have been killed intentionally, that have been murdered, because that is one of the horrors of war. Atrocities happen, and they happen on both sides. So I'm not naive enough to, I don't think that some of the things you've described don't happen. They do happen. However, Israel goes to great lengths to minimize this, and you do a disservice to your fellow countrymen who serve when you try to misrepresent the reality. The reason they shoot at the legs and not the head is to minimize civilian casualties, is to avoid civilian deaths. That's another example of the IDF going to lengths that many other militaries wouldn't go to in a conflict zone. And I accept that that's been wavered, that rule at the moment in the current conflict, for obvious reasons. But there are few armies that would go to that same length to minimize. You've got a threat, and you're told not to shoot for the head, not to shoot to kill, but to shoot for the legs. And there's countless propaganda comes out of Gaza. Look at all the Palestinians that have been crippled by the IDF. They've been crippled because the Israelis tried to minimize civilian casualties. It is better to injure someone than to kill them. And it's disappointing to hear you twist that to frame the IDF as being immoral, when that's a clear example of them trying to minimize civilian casualties.
I'm not sure why you think I'm trying to twist that when I opened by clearly explaining Israel's code of conduct and its intention to minimize harm. This is the code of conduct.
Okay, so then I misunderstood. So you're saying that's a positive, and it's another example of the Israelis doing what they can to minimize.
We were taught the code of conduct. We were taught, and we were very clearly taught this was, and we were taught this in basic training very early on. It's to minimize harm. Once we got into our actual service and served in the West Bank, I started seeing examples, and I didn't see an example of soldiers shooting unarmed people. Again, in times of quiet, this happens significantly less. But I did see examples of abuse. I saw examples of Palestinians being hit. I saw them being left tied up in zip ties with their eyes covered with blindfolded, left in
Can I ask one question on that, just to
Yeah.
understand? I don't want to take. I'm
Mhm.
not questioning. Was that for no reason, or was this person picked up for doing something they weren't supposed to do? So, is it an innocent person that's been abused, or is it someone that was carrying out a terror attack or rioting and wasn't treated at a standard you would expect them to treat?
They are always accused of something. It is unclear if they committed it, but the accusations of what I've seen has been either stone throwing or coming too close to a fence. Once it was even a shepherd who his sheep went too close to a fence. He was arrested and zip tied for all too many hours and left in a military outpost in relative cold. Um, Another anecdote, my brother is not involved in the peace process. You could even say he's he's not a right winger, but he's not, many would describe me as more of a lefty. But he was an officer, and his commanding officer every morning in the West Bank, every single morning would go to a Palestinian village and empty a full magazine of bullets into the air, right? It's not to cause harm, but 5, 6 a.m. would unload this. My brother asked him why he's doing it. He said to show presence, right? You want to show presence. So there's a lot of examples of these excesses on the day to day in the West Bank. This contributes to the psychological toll. And then when you have a situation in Gaza where Israelis are furious, and again, Israelis are not unique. I want to be very clear. Israelis are not unique. War crimes are common in war. So it's not that Israelis are different in this regard. It's that there's not much accountability when this happens. Elor Azaria, right? This was an example from a few years ago. There was a terrorist that was shot. He was no longer a threat. Elor Azaria came and shot him. Because he shot him on camera. There was some outcry. He was put in jail. It ended up only being for a few months. And again, he committed a war crime. To come and shoot an unarmed terrorist is still a war crime. His sentence was reduced. He only served a few months, and some segment of the Israeli population view him as a hero. So again,
So,
it doesn't.
A few things that.
Yeah, just real quick. The culture existing doesn't mean every soldier does it. No, I've seen other sides. I've seen soldiers treat Palestinians kindly. I had, me as a soldier in the West Bank, I had positive interactions with Palestinians. I even once got in trouble because I bought some bread and cheese off a Palestinian at a checkpoint. I opened his trunk and I'm like, "What's this?" He's like, "It's cheese." I'm like, "Can I buy some?" Sure. I got in trouble. Right. So there's some there's definitely that exists, but the good interactions, that's great and all. It's these bad interactions where there's very little accountability. These actions cause Palestinians harm, both physical and psychological, prolong the conflict, and again, is something that we should condemn, and Israel can do a lot more to stop this from happening.
So there's a lot to unpack. So I think what you're doing, the equivalent of, I was shooting a documentary with the BBC, and what you're doing is the equivalent of this. I noticed out of the corner of my eye an Israeli soldier helping an elderly Palestinian man up the stairs. And I screamed at the BBC cameraman, film that, because no one ever sees that on television. So to their credit, they filmed it. It made it into the B-roll, an Israeli soldier helping a Palestinian. If I were to say that is the average experience of every Palestinian when they meet an Israeli soldier, is acts of chesed, acts of kindness, and the only interaction that Palestinians have with Israeli soldiers is pure kindness, you would say that's insane. That's not really. Yeah, yes, there are acts of kindness. The soldiers like yourself, you bought some cheese from a Palestinian. That's an act of kindness, or a transaction at the very least. But it's human interaction, but it's not representative. Representative would be the IDF is there for a reason, and that's to keep the peace and for security. You maybe would add some things that I disagree with, but by and large, that's their function. And so there are interactions, there are positive interactions, there are negative interactions. But when you go to extreme acts of aggression or extreme acts of kindness, they're the exception rather than the norm. And what you're doing is painting the exception as the norm, and that's what I object to. You then extend it. So I saw someone in your comments, and you did the same thing with Adar, is where you have a terrorist who carries out a terror attack, and then you object to what happens to that terrorist. So tragically, a 14-year-old boy in Jerusalem, which I think someone called Justino in your chat who doesn't like me, I've been keeping an eye. But a 14-year-old boy tragically has been raised in a culture where he thought was appropriate to stab a soldier in the stomach multiple times, and then he was shot running from the attack. Now, I have sympathy for the situation. I have sympathy that a child has been radicalized to the extent where they're trying to murder Israelis. That's horrendous that's where we are, and that's truly sad. But I don't think a soldier did anything wrong for then neutralizing, even though that kid was only 14. I don't think they were wrong to neutralize a child who's just stabbed someone multiple times. Similar with Adar, his story is he believed that he thought he had explosives. Now, whether this is true or false, let's say even it's false. Let's say that's all. Mm-hmm. To make the equivalency between a war crime and that, saying this is a war crime, first and foremost, the Geneva Convention applies to civilians and prisoners of war. It doesn't apply to terrorists. Geneva Conventions is not applicable to terrorists. And so you could argue it's immoral, but there would be many that would argue actually, if Adar is right and there was the potential to blow himself up still, then the laws of the Geneva Convention do not apply in this for multiple reasons. One, he was still a threat. Two, he was a terrorist. He wasn't a prisoner of war. He wasn't a civilian. But I think the key thing, so I wanted to touch on some of those points. I think the equivalency between ordinary civilians being abused and terrorists that are killed after they've carried out terror attacks, whether it's, I've forgotten the name of the person who Adar killed, and I don't know the 14-year-old kid's name, but both of those were carrying out a terror attack. That is not the same as an Israeli soldier murdering an innocent Palestinian. I'm sure we would agree on that. There is
without a doubt. I would say both are wrong. One is certainly more wrong. Both happen, sadly.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd use the word sadly for the death.
Look. I'm not gonna come and say a terrorist who is unarmed and shot is the worst thing in the world. I don't think it should happen. But that's not the hill I'm gonna die on. Yeah. What I am saying is right now in Gaza, unarmed Palestinians are being killed.
Look,
they're being shot by Israelis, even if they're waving white flags, even if they're unarmed. There's a level of hostility, and again, we could say it shouldn't be hard to understand the hostility given October 7th, given the history of the conflict. Fine, but it also shouldn't be hard to understand why people are widely condemning Israel. And
can I give you a real example?
Israel should do more to stop this from happening.
Can I give you a real example? A few weeks ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago, I put out a video. We've got a new station in the UK called ITV. They released some footage of 5 Palestinians holding one white flag, and they're walking along the pavement, and you hear gunshots, and then they run back from the way they came. And they were trying to reach family who were on the other side. They're on the edge of the safe zone. Hamas and the IDF had been clashing with each other, and they were trying to advance. They had a family member on the other side who was stuck behind the IDF, and they wanted to retrieve him. They then ran when gunshots rang out from the position of the IDF. Mm-hmm. That camera then cut, and one of them has been shot, and then you see them carrying the dead body of the Palestinian. And they put like a flag over it, the white flag over his face, and they carry him behind a gate. We did a lot of analysis on the video. We heard multiple caliber weapons firing. And it was very clear there was a gun battle going on. We also did the analysis on how long it would have taken them to move the distance they'd moved. And it looked like they'd been shot within 1 to 2 seconds. A couple of days later, CNN then released some footage. And it showed the whole thing. And what it showed was that it showed them walking back the way they'd come when they were shot at. And so they hadn't died within the 1 to 2 seconds we thought they'd died. What had happened was the IDF had shot, or someone had shot. They ran away from the gunfire. And then there's a second video which starts with them walking back towards the direction they've just been shot from. So one of two things happened here. Either they were caught in the crossfire because there was clearly a gun battle going on, or they were killed by the IDF. But here's the thing which wasn't reported by anyone. And I actually did it. We spent a lot of money, invested a lot of money producing this video, and I did it. We pulled it. We pulled the video because our analysis was wrong. We'd analyzed this 1 to 2 seconds when it was actually they got shot with a second round of bullets later on. So either they were killed in the crossfire or they were killed by an IDF bullet. Now, we won't know whether that was intentional or accidental, but what I'm sure both you and I would agree is there will have been screams for them to stop. There will have been warned to stop. If you come beyond a certain point, they will shoot to kill in a conflict zone. And this Palestinian family, tragically, after being shot at, then advanced again, and one of them was tragically killed. Now, that was reported around the world as Israel kills someone with a white flag.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying that death was justified. I'm not defending the killing. What I'm saying is all of that complexity, and I know this one case because I did a lot of research for this one video, all of that complexity was missing from the headline, that there was a gun battle going on, that actually they'd advanced once, then retreated after being shot at, and then advanced again with a white flag. All of this was missing from the reporting, and instead it was reported Israel killed someone with a white flag. Now, in the fog of war, it's very difficult to ascertain what the truth is. But what I would pose is Israel does have a code of conduct. And the fact that someone with a white flag is killed does not mean that Israel is just going around murdering people with white flags because they want to kill innocent civilians. It's also not to say that that can't happen, because as I said, like every soldier in the IDF is not some moral saint. Like you will have monsters in there, just like you will in any military force. But as a general rule, the IDF has a code of conduct, and it does not go around as you're proposing, where there's a general atmosphere of lusting for dead Palestinians. I would say that goes against the code of conduct, and my evidence is the lack of dead Palestinians. Because if that were the case, we would have much higher death tolls, both in the Gaza war today, but on the average year when the death toll is around 100, and the overwhelming majority of them, like it was in its 90, it was around 90% were killed carrying out violent attacks against the IDF or civilians.
Yeah, so again, we're in agreement that there is a code of conduct. That code of conduct is to minimize harm. The code of conduct is not enforced in many instances, and this is my critique, that there is a culture, and again, it's not all Israeli soldiers, but it is all too pervasive, and there is close to no accountability. In the West Bank, it is actually much harder because, again, West Bank, you don't have the fog of war. Every Palestinian killed, there's a report that needs to be undergone. They need to explain how they were killed, what happened, etc. Right now in Gaza, that accountability goes way down. There's not a report for every Gazan killed, and it's an opportunity for those who do have that lust for either vengeance or to get an X on their gun. They are abusing their power, and they are not being held accountable, and their officers are not doing enough to stop this from happening. And the example of the 3 hostages who were shot dead by the same unit that a few months earlier shot 4 unarmed Palestinians and then put guns near them, and I'll send you the video if you want to see it. That just happened to be recorded. most engagement between Israeli soldiers and Palestinians is not being recorded. It's very fair to assume that those are not the only instances of it happening. So again, I'm not saying the code of conduct doesn't exist, and I'm not saying all Israelis break the code of conduct.
Would you
But
say, just to that point, would you say that most adhere to it?
do most adhere to it? In the West Bank, it's very hard for me to know what's happening in Gaza right now. I don't know.
I
Are
agree.
most adhering to it? I really don't know. In the West Bank, you don't have all too many instances of soldiers just shooting random Palestinians. I could say that for certain. Uh, you do have, call it like minor abuses, like being rough, being aggressive, speaking in a demeaning way. Again, this isn't necessarily against the code of conduct. The code of conduct doesn't say you need to be nice to Palestinians, right? So there's that. There's more the culture. I would say the majority of soldiers in the West Bank, they're not super nice, they're not super mean, but the norm is more like, it's to speak to them as if they're in other and different. It's to command them. You don't greet them. You don't say, "Hey, how are you?" You say, "Go, move." Like you talk to them kind of like they're lesser than you, like you're commanding to them something. Which again, this is demeaning to them. That's in the West Bank. That's in times of relative quiet. It's much harder. There's much less anger in those instances, and there's much more accountability, although not nearly enough. In Gaza, you have much more anger, much less accountability, and we do have examples of unarmed civilians being shot and some waving white flags.
Yeah, I'd agree with you on Gaza. It's harder. So there is a code of conduct. I assume it's been adhered to, but there's, in the sense that I think the death toll would be much higher if it wasn't. But there's
Well,
no
the
way.
death toll is pretty damn high, but
Proportional
we
to the level of violence, it's not. I mean, it's a high death toll, and we don't know how high because I don't trust Hamas. You have more confidence in them I do. We don't have to go back to that.
yeah, we could go deeper on that in round two.
Um,
I feel like we've covered a lot of ground. Maybe I'll share some final thoughts and then I'll give you the last word, and we could schedule another one if you'd like. Even on your channel, I'm open to that. In fact, actually, do you know the channel Modern Day Debates?
yeah, I know them
So
well.
it's a cool channel. So I've been on that channel twice already. I've been on the pro-Israel side both times. They invited me back, and I'd actually be down to switch it up and take the pro-Palestine side. So they said if I have a worthy opponent, they would do it. So if you'd like, maybe we could do this next one on Modern Day
Yeah.
Debates.
Yeah, we could do the next one there, but God help us if you're the pro-Israel voice. I mean, I love you because you're a fellow.
Well, but here's the thing. Yeah, no, fair. And some of the comments said, "Is that the pro-Israel voice?" But I often debate the opposing side, so I can debate the pro-Israel side quite well. And I'm going to end my final thoughts is going to be to just throw a wrench in some things here, because let me start to say things that might surprise some new viewers. Right? I'm going to start by saying Israel has a right to exist. Jews have a right to remain safe living on the land. Palestinian resistance has been primarily violent and primarily targeted towards civilians. And this is a very large part of why they are in the current situation they are in unwillingness to compromise and an unwillingness to engage in more peaceful resistance. Yes, Palestinians have, in many regards, been their own worst enemy. I don't think they've been a worse enemy than Israel has, but they are a quite bad enemy to themselves with their actions towards Jews. All this is true. I hold this to be true, and I will debate this side as well. That said, even though Israel has a right to exist, and even though Israel has been defending its people against those who want to destroy them, that does not mean Israel is thereby a moral actor or an honest actor. It doesn't mean Israel is innocent and can do no wrong. And me, as an Israeli, where most of my family lives in Israel, a country and a people I dearly care about, I view it as my moral obligation to speak these truths, as hard as they are for some people to hear. And I will leave it with that. Joseph, you're welcome to have the final words.
Okay. So Israel is facing a genocidal enemy. And so when it comes to the question of proportional, we have to look at the intentions of both parties, and then look at the actions that they're taking to mitigate, to minimize civilian casualties. So I'm going to start by just sharing a few quotes. I was going to do it earlier in the debate, but I got the closing statement, so I will share it there. So in 2015, Sheikh Iyad Abu Funun, who on Al-Aqsa TV, which is one of Hamas's main television channels, said, "Not a single Jew will remain on this land. We will not leave a single Jew on our Islamic land. No child, no adult, no settler, no soldier. We will not leave a single one of you alive." Yahya Sinwar said, "The conflict," this is in 2019, the conflict will only end with the removal of the occupation from all of our sacred soil. Fatih Hamad, again on Al-Aqsa TV, same year, 2019. "Oh, you 7 million Palestinians abroad, enough warming up. There are Jews everywhere. We must attack every Jew on planet Earth. We must slaughter and kill them. With Allah's help, enough warming up." Again, Fatih Hamid, 2 years later, "People of Jerusalem, we want you to cut off the heads of the Jews with knives." For years, Hamas warned us of their genocidal intention. And yet many in the Israeli camp believed that peace was possible, not just with the Palestinians, not just with the Palestinian Authority, but with the modern day inheritors of the Nazi ideology, with Hamas. On October the 7th, they lived up to that genocidal promise, and they crossed over into Israel and indiscriminately slaughtered 1,200 people, women, children, babies, kidnapped, took many back to Gaza, and forced Israel into a war that Israel did not want. They did not warn civilians. They indiscriminately slaughtered them. In contrast, Israel had to respond. Gaza had been turned into a fortified city, into a fortified land, 500 kilometers of tunnels, hospitals, schools. There wasn't a building, even sacred mosques had been turned into military positions to attack the Jews, to attack Israel. Despite that, despite Hamas placing its civilians between them and Israel, their own civilians, who they said, Hamas said, their obligation is to fight Israel. It's the United Nations obligation to protect the civilians, which is why they didn't let the civilians into their tunnels. They're for the Hamas fighters only. Despite that, Israel went at incredible lengths to warn civilians to leave. It created humanitarian corridors. It allowed civilians to leave, but their exit from Israel was blocked. Egypt locked the Gaza border. Israel allowed in 160,000 tons of aid. Israel is providing utilities to an enemy population, which no other nation does, and is being held to a higher standard than any other nation. And my closing comments are, this is not the actions of a genocidal regime that wants to destroy the Palestinians, that disregards Palestinian life. This is a regime, Israel, the current unity government, which is paying lives over its own soldiers often. There's a huge complaint from the Israeli right that we are to minimize civilian casualties, we're placing our own soldiers in harm's way. And so these are not the actions of a nation that wants to destroy and harm civilians. In contrast, October the 7th and the overwhelming support, 85% of Palestinian support in those acts, So the overwhelming support of October 7th and the actions themselves are an illustration of disproportionate attack, of attempts at genocide. And with that, I will close my thoughts. It's
awesome. Thank you so much, Joseph. This was a great discussion. I think people really appreciate how, despite our differences, we can come here and engage respectfully, especially when the climate is one where everyone's yelling at each other, being mean to each other. Let this be an example of how conversations should be respectful and with integrity. So I definitely appreciate you showing up and sharing your perspective. We will schedule something on modern day debates. I think that could be fun. I will email them. To those tuning in, thank you so much for joining. Next week, we have a stream next Thursday with an organization called Tidna International. It's a grassroots campus-based peace and open dialogue initiative which seeks to solidify Arabs and Jews as cousins, one unified family, not as enemies. I actually think this is an organization that you, Joseph, would also agree is important. I guess let's see what they actually stand for, but that's their mission statement. We're going to have them on. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. If you want to support the show, you can see how to do that in the description. If you want to follow Israel Advocacy Network, you have links in the description as well. Sending you all love. Thank you, Joseph. Until next time.
You're welcome.